All right, Heather, I think we should kick things off.
Yes, all right. So again, thank you so much to everyone for being here this evening, and thank you so much to our panel, our very distinguished panel that we have this evening, for taking the next hour and a half or so out of their super busy schedules to be with us this evening. So the first artist that we are going to introduce is Anna Masakote. She can only be here with us for about 30 minutes. So we're going to introduce her, tell you a little bit about her biography, and show some of her work. We also have Rachel Bertone, Lidiya Yankovskaya, Dr. Tiffany Chang, Dr. Nicolás Alberto Dosman, and Michael J. Bobbitt with us this evening. So welcome, panel. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Alex, should I read Anna's biography right now? Do we want to just
Before we jump into our biographies, I just wanted to note that this is the second episode in the Ask an Expert series between Heather Gallagher and myself. Both of us are teaching artists at the North End Music and Performing Arts Center. For those of you who've seen the acronym NEMPAC, that is what it spells out to. I have been fortunately working with NEMPAC since 2011. And I am the artistic director of the NEMPAC Opera Project there. One of our panelists this evening, Dr. Tiffany Chang, and I actually work together on the Opera Project. So it's thrilling to get to sit on the opposite end of the table from Tiffany instead of on the same side at listening to wonderful, wonderful arias in a row as we sit through our opera season. But in terms of why this panel came about, there was a need for Heather and for myself to really bring to our community all these wonderful experts in different fields in the arts, and so many of them working in the greater Boston area, but also some working in the Midwest, in Maine, and in other areas, and internationally when called to do so. And so it's so exciting that in our little nook of Boston, we can have this access to what seems like so far away, because we definitely feel that the T influence on accessing places off of the T line. But in terms of having this panel together, it's a real treat for NEMPAC. It's something that we haven't done in recent history. And so for myself, from the NEMPAC Opera Project, and also as a teaching artist, I'm thrilled to be able to bring experts in all the fields of the arts to our community, and to really hear what they have to say, being a leader in their field, and their take on diversity and inclusivity and equity in terms of amplifying marginalized voices in the arts. So one of the focuses tonight will really be hearing their respective work and challenges and action plans in doing so. And Heather Gallagher is an extremely talented mezzo-soprano that I had the fortune of going to grad school with, and who knew, Heather, that 10 years later here we would be. So very exciting for both of us. So without further ado, Heather's going to kick it off with reading the bios of our guests, and after that we will be sharing video highlights of their work so that we can all get to know them just a little bit better.
All right. The first artist that we have this evening, her name is Anna Masakote, and she is an award-winning Latin dance specialist and womanpreneur who passionately believes that through dance we can facilitate social change within communities. She has spread the salsa bug to more than 30 countries across 5 continents, is founder of Dance to Power, an online dance academy, also founder of Soy a movement to build racial equity in the arts for Latinx MA artists, and an advocate for LGBTQ positive inclusivity in the Afro-Latin dance industry. The next artist we have this, I'm sorry. The next artist we have this evening is Rachel Bertone, and she is an award-winning director, choreographer, and a professor of theater and dance. She has directed and or choreographed over 50 musicals in the Boston theater scene alone. Select direction/choreography credits include Cabaret, Irene Award Best Direction, Choreography, Best Musical, Carousel, Irene Award Best Choreography, In the Heights, Irene Award Best Musical, and The Wild Party, Irene Award Best Musical. She's also been involved with Gypsy, Kiss the Spider Woman, Billy Elliot, Little Shop of Horrors, Showboat, Hair, Barnum, West Side Story, and Guys and Dolls. Rachel is passionate about education, enriching the lives of young performers, and amplifying female identifying voices. She has taught at numerous prestigious institutions, including the Boston Conservatory at Berkeley, the American Repertory Theater Institute at Harvard University, Emerson College, and Long Island University Post. She privately coaches performers both in New York City, where she currently resides, and Boston. And she proudly holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Boston Conservatory. Next artist we have is conductor Lidiya Yankovskaya, and she is a fiercely committed advocate for Russian masterpieces, operatic rarities, and contemporary works on the leading edge of classical music. As music director of Chicago Opera Theater, she has established the Vanguard Initiative, a three-pronged investment in new opera that includes a 2-year residency for emerging opera composers. Ms. Yankovskaya is also founder and artistic director of the Refugee Orchestra Project, which proclaims the cultural and societal relevance of refugees through music. She is alumna of Dallas Opera's Heart Institute for Women Conductors and Marin Alsop's Taki Concordia Fellowship, and a recipient of a 2018 Solti Foundation Career Assistance Award. A sought-after speaker, Ms. Yankovskaya has led sessions at the League of American Orchestras and Opera America conferences and recently served as U.S. representative to the World Opera Forum in Madrid. We also have Dr. Tiffany Chang with us this evening, and she is a Taiwanese American conductor, and she has cultivated an international reputation of exceptional versatility, vision, and integrity. Recipient of the 2020 Solti Foundation U.S. Career Assistance Award, Chang currently serves on the artist faculties of Oberlin Conservatory and Berklee College of Music. She was featured in the Dallas Opera's 2019 Heart Institute for Women Conductors and named the 2017 winner of the American Prize in Opera Conducting. She served 8 seasons as music director/conductor for the North End Music and Performing Arts Center Opera Project in Boston. Established as a leading collegiate conductor, Chang provides bold leadership for the Oberlin Arts and Sciences Orchestra and inspired heightened artistic standards, striking collaborations, and soaring visibility. She previously led impactful terms as interim director of orchestral studies at Baldwin Wallace Conservatory, acting director of orchestral activities at Boston University, and founder of the New England Repertory Orchestra. Chang has also been engaged by Blue Water Chamber Orchestra, Opera Hub, the Pro Art Chamber Orchestra of Boston, Dinosaur Annex Contemporary Ensemble, Aliyah 3, Xanthos Ensemble, Brookline Symphony Orchestra, Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra, and Northern Ohio Youth Orchestras. Chang studied conducting with David Hose and Bridget Mikhail Rachel. She has also worked with Carlo Montanaro, Emmanuel Villaume, Gustav Mayer, Joanne Folletta, Robert Spano, Gunther Schuler, Larry Rockleff. She holds degrees in orchestral conducting, cello performance, music education, composition, and music theory. We also have with us Dr. Nicolás Dosman, and he is an assistant professor of music and director of choral studies at the University of Southern Maine School of Music. He has served as a clinician and conductor throughout New England at National NAFME, National Association for Music Education, and ACDA, the American Choral Directors Association conferences, as well as international venues. He studied choral conducting with Dr. Dino Aganost, Columbia University, and Drs. Andre Thomas and Kevin Fenton at Florida State University. He attended the Oberlin Conservatory of Music, where he received his Bachelor's of Music. His scholarly interests include male participation in choral ensembles, music teacher preparation, urban school districts, and social justice. And last but certainly not least, today we have with us Mr. Michael J. Bobbitt, and he is the artistic director of New Repertory Theater. He is an arts leader, a director, choreographer, and playwright. And in 2019, Michael J. Bobbitt served as artistic director for Adventure Theater MTC in Maryland since 2007, where he led the organization to be a respected theater training company in the DC region, as well as nationally influential professional theater for young audiences. He led a merger with Musical Theater Center, increased the organizational budget and audience, commissioned new works by noted playwrights, transferred 2 shows to off-Broadway, built an academy, and earned dozens of Helen Hayes Award nominations, including 8 wins. Bobbitt has directed and choreographed at Area Stage, Ford's Theater, the Shakespeare Theater Company, Olney Theater Center, Studio Theater, Woolly Mammoth Theater, Center Stage, Roundhouse Theater, the Kennedy Center, and the Washington National Opera. His national and international credits include the New York Musical Theater Festival, Mel Tillis 2001, La Jolla Playhouse, Children's Theater of Charlotte, Jefferson Performing Arts Center, and the Olympics. As a writer, his work was chosen for the New York City International Fringe Festival and the New York and Musical Theater Festival. He has 2 plays published by Rogers and Hammerstein Theatricals. He trained at Harvard Business School's Strategic Perspectives in Nonprofit Management, the National Arts Strategies Chief Executive Program, Certificate in Diversity and Inclusion from Cornell, and other top leadership programs. He earned the Excel Leadership Award, the Center for Nonprofit Advancement, the Emerging Leader Award, County Executives Excellence in the Arts and Humanities, and Person of the Year Award, Maryland Theater Guide, among others. And again, thank you so much to our very distinguished panel for being with us this evening.
Yes, thank you and welcome. Just in case you were just joining us, as I let in several people during the bio reading, if you can keep yourself muted on your end, you have the option of having your camera turned on or off. This is the North End Music and Performing Arts Center Ask an Expert series, and we're going to kick it off with a video that Michael Bobbitt sent to us that he has prepared for an art exhibit at Harvard. Michael, would you be able to set up this video clip for us to let us know what we are going to take away from it?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. It's good to be among musicians. My first love and my first major was classical music, voice and trumpet. So it's good to be in the room with you all again. So the Harvard Art Museum, I am an ambassador, and they asked me to do, they were doing a video installation based on an exhibit they had, which was entitled I Belong. So it was a lot of stories about the immigrant, it was a lot of immigrant stories, art displays and photos. And so here's the video that I created with them.
Wonderful. So I'm going into screen share, everyone. Fingers crossed always for screen share.
So many emails.
Oh, you know the life of an artistic director.
I do.
I'm sure mine are paling in the moment as our season is on hiatus. So without further ado, this is Crossing Lines, Constructing Home, I Belong with Michael J. Bobbitt from the New Repertory Theater.
You know, when I grew up, I was a young Black child in lower Northwest DC, growing up without means and without excess income to pursue things that weren't the basic living needs. In my youth, I was able to get exposed to art and music and dance and theater, and you know, sometimes you don't know where you belong, and then all of a sudden, through an experience, you find out where you belong. And I remember I got the chance to be Hansel in the third act of Hansel and Gretel, and I remember doing something on stage and the room erupted in laughter, and that was like the moment I knew what I was supposed to do, and I knew where I belonged, and I knew that this was something that I needed to continue doing to get that feeling back again. I think our society is populated mostly by art that is specific to a specific culture. Most of my training was in Western European art forms, and so it's interesting as an adult coming back to the things that I connect to culturally that are completely different than the the art that I was trained in, and then trying to figure out in my current job how to make sure that the art that my audiences are experiencing is diverse and cultural. And being able to walk through this exhibit has been incredible because I get to see art that is about people that are from different cultures and different backgrounds and different parts of the world. And I feel a connection to them because of that. You know, art and music and food sort of bring people together. You can't be in a room when there's art and food and not feel a connection to people. It's an interesting world that we live in right now. I have an 18-year-old kid who was adopted from Vietnam when he was 8 months old. A few years back, when the immigration became sort of a subject of current events, he and I became a little scared about his adoption status. So we had to go back and file some more paperwork and took a trip back to Vietnam. He sort of felt more of his belonging. But it's interesting, we have that shared experience. So I belong when I'm in theater, and now I get to run a theater and help other people belong.
I love
Michael,
that.
I just think that that was such a beautiful share. One of the things that struck me the most in even just watching you speak is feeling like you're speaking directly to my story, and it's such a personal connection that you bring. But for anyone who was able to witness, you were recently interviewed by your son. Is that correct?
Yeah. I had a moment of we went away to Rhode Island this past weekend, and he said, you know, Dad, I know you really well, and there are lots of people that think they know you, but they really don't know what it's like to be a Black man in America. And also for you, specifically, what it's like to be a Black man running a predominantly white organization. What if we went on Facebook Live and talked about that? And I was like, that's scary. It's the scariest thing I've ever done. And so he curated with my husband these questions, and then we did a Facebook Live Q&A, and it was very scary to me. I embrace vulnerability. I think vulnerability is the key to happiness. But I think in my professional life, the fear of losing jobs because I talk about who I really am was very present. And so that was a moment of like, I'm going to do this. A lot of people need to hear this. A lot of people need to put a personal face on this person that they feel like they know, but they really don't know. They really don't know.
That definitely came across in the interview. I think one of my absolute favorite moments was how quickly your son jumped right into hard-hitting questions. And as a parent myself, I can only imagine when my 4-year-old gets to the point where there's just no holds barred there. And it's that wonderful joy of seeing you in your home that really makes your art that much more personal to your audience. One of my favorite things that you said, though, was about presenting stories, and I'm going to paraphrase, and I'd like for you to clarify for our audience, presenting stories of people of color that are based on their joys, and presenting stories of people of color that are based on their cultural contributions, and where programming really allows us to explore both of those and where they meet. Is this something that you have always done in your career? Is this something that you've begun to champion recently?
I think I've been drawn to those kind of stories more, and partly, you know, when I grew up loving musical theater, you watch it on TV and there are no stories. There are people that look like you. They're white people and their stories. And most of the musical theater was joyful stories. And so I got to experience white culture from a very specific lens. But when I saw my stories, they were all about the trauma of race or people getting abused. And I think that in American theater, when a marginalized character is in a play, the play or musical becomes about the thing that makes them marginalized. And as a gay Black man, I don't think about being a gay Black man all day, every day. They're all ever present. I mean, that's part of my intersectionality, is that I can't do anything in my life without being gay or without being Black. But it's not how I live every single day. And I think that American entertainment in general focuses so much on the difficult, hard stories. And I think people would empathize and understand more if we had stories that were centered around joy and the cultural contributions of people of color. My whole dream is that this idea of race is flipped, and race is something to be revered and enjoyed and sought after, and that you feel like you're missing something if you're not experiencing people from other cultures.
Thank you for that. It's definitely, if for anyone on this call who's experienced seeing a season's announcement or seeing what's coming up in terms of what can be programmed at a theater or for a season for an orchestra, there's always that conversation point of, what do we pick and what do we repeat and what do we take a risk on that's brand new? And so I hope, Michael, that we can delve even further into that when we reach our forum tonight. Thank you so much.
Yep.
I did see that our other panelists, Lidiya and Ana Masacote, have joined us. Hello, Lidiya. Hello, Ana. We are just beginning our video share of our panelists. So we have just introduced everyone to Michael Bobbitt's work, and we're going to now pivot our focus to Ana Masacote. Welcome, Ana. Ana and I had the wonderful fortune to work together at her organization, Yo Soy Lola, and they are an organization that works to reclaim the Latina narrative in the arts. And I remember reading about their mission and just feeling, as a Puerto Rican who was raised in a household where we were allowed to be Puerto Rican at home, but had to present very non-Puerto Rican outside of the home, that it was this beautiful moment for me to get to work with her and with all the other artists who are Lolas, and to really feel that connective thread. So welcome, Ana. Can you speak to our audience today a little bit about your work at Yo Soy Lola, but also your work in the salsa world?
Hello, everybody. My name is Ana Masacote. I'm an Afro-Latin dance specialist. I've been doing dance for over 20 years now, and I'm probably giving away my age here, but I run an online dance academy, and I would say about 3 years ago I began an project, what started as a project called Yo Soy Lola, which is Latinas Orgullosas de las Artes, or Latinas Proud of the Latin Arts. And that was a grassroots movement to really start building, first of all, at that point, more connectivity and networking within Latina artists here in the New England area. And that grew, was such a success. It ended up growing into a larger project that was turned into more of a smaller grassroots organization. And the goal of the mission of the organization is to create more racial equity in the arts, specifically around Latina identifying artists. And also bringing up more Latinx artists in the field through scholarships. So it's a scholarship initiative, and we raise scholarships, 3 scholarships every year that we are able to give away. So we're 3 years in the making. Yes, I've had the extreme pleasure to be able to work with you, Alex. And in this work, what's been really interesting is realizing how many artists there are out there that we didn't know, and how unconnected our networks were. And realizing that there's so much power in bringing these voices together and allowing a platform for us that we can create together and feel like it's our own in the arts.
It was so inspiring to work with your organization. And for anyone who sees in the fall the next Yo Soy Lola Gala, when it's at Club Oberon in Harvard Square, you will not have a more fulfilling evening of theater, of dance, of spoken word, and then the entire night culminates in a dance party of joy. And so it's one of those experiences that you run the gamut of emotions right from the beginning, and then you get to end by letting it out physically. And it was such an absolute pleasure to be a part of this past October. Ana, can you speak to us about the salsa world and the work that you do with gender fluid leading in salsa?
Yes, so I am a queer Chicana, and I will say that for me, I have learned bringing all my identities into the room is very important. So I definitely come on board, and I definitely always say I'm queer. I'm oh, I'm Latina, I'm here, I'm proud. And I want people to know it because I think visibility is very, very important, especially in the arts community. So for me, I've really also been very, I don't want to say motivated, but very passionate about really wanting to bring more equity within the Afro-Latin dance industry and more LGBTQ inclusivity. So I run a project called Despelotics, which is about an event series here in Boston that's creating more Afro-Latin dance inclusivity for the LGBTQ community and really highlighting queer artists in the field and bringing this more outwardly facing in the queer community versus giving people a platform to feel that they can, that this is a space for them as well. And the industry at large, I mean, the Latin dance and music industry can be very biased towards a very male-oriented lead and female-oriented follow perspective. So it's very gender biased. And the work that I'm doing is really about trying to break down those stereotypical norms that we have in our minds and changing that into something that people can realize is not dependent on your gender or on your sexuality based on where you want to place yourself in the industry. Did we lose Alex? I think we did. So that's my work at Despelotics. I also do a lot of work internationally. I'm actually working on an event called the Glitter Gala tomorrow night. And it's a Latin dance event that we're actually going to be bringing on artists from all over the globe. So the Latin dance industry in the last, I want to say 3 years, has been really wanting to create more equity within the LGBTQ community in the Latin dance field. And so what they've been doing is that you've seen a lot of organizations starting to create more festivals and more events and more happenings in schools and classes around. And so what we're doing tomorrow night is bringing together some of those organizations from the West Coast here, and artists from Australia and around the globe, Australia, Mexico, Canada, here in, of course, the US. And we're bringing them all together to do performances and really make a statement about being queer, being visible in the Afro-Latin dance industry, and being able to have people realize that lead and follow are two different things, and that is something that needs to be understood within the industry.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. I'm going to take this moment to to introduce someone that I was jumping around so much in my biographies. I left out a very important panel member, and I'm so very sorry. I'd like to introduce Fred C. VanNess Jr. to you. I'm just going to read his biography very quickly. Recent appearances include Russell Davenport and Freedom Ride, Chicago Opera Theater, Voltaire and Gloss, an Opera del West production of Candide, tenor soloist in Sybil Beebe's Castle of Our Skins world premiere, tenor soloist in Jeffrey Gibbs's Tide Flowers, University of Rhode Island world premiere, and featured soloist in Regal Music Theater's Christmas Time. He recently debuted his one-man show, When I Think of Home, McNeese State University. Mr. VanNess holds degrees from the Laundry School of Music at Bard College and Louisiana State University. Thank you so much, Fred, for joining us this evening, and I'm so sorry that I left you out earlier. Thank you so much for being here. Alex, you are back. Hooray. As Alex connects to Zoom, I'm going to introduce Rachel Bertone. Rachel, would you like to say something? It sounds like you've got a fantastic experience in the arts in Boston. You're a graduate of Boston Conservatory. Can you speak to the theater scenes, challenges within inclusivity, and what it's been like to work with a number of different theaters in Boston and in New York?
Hi, yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel. I actually just a little background, I actually started in the classical dance world. I grew up dancing. I was a little bunhead at Boston Ballet, and then I went to the Boston Conservatory for dance. And while I was there, I discovered my love for theater, actually. And I went on and I graduated from there, and I started performing in the city of Boston. And I was also teaching. And so I never knew I was going to become a director and choreographer, actually, which has been such an exciting journey. So I feel very blessed that I've been able to hone my craft in the city of Boston. I think I now reside in New York, but I also still work in the city of Boston. I just did hair. I directed hair at New Rep with Michael, which was such a wonderful experience to work with Michael. And I hope to continue coming back. Boston is my home, and I think we do a lot of work there. We have a lot of work to do still. One of the challenges for me, you know, as a woman in this field, you know, I did struggle, you know, climbing the ladder and having to prove my sense of worth to a predominantly male theater scene. So I was working for mostly, you know, male artistic directors and producers at the very beginning of my career, and that was very challenging in many ways. And that's part of the reason why I've become so passionate about amplifying the voices of female identifying artists in particular. I believe in making space for all at the table. Everyone needs a space at the table. But because I never had that female role model when I was younger, I want to help uplift younger female identifying artists to show them that they too have a seat at the table. So that's to speak upon just one of the challenges, and I can only speak through the lens of a woman on this panel today, but that's one of those challenges we face.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rachel. I would like to introduce, and I've worked with in the past, who is the artistic director of Chicago Opera Theater, as well as the artistic director of the Refugee Orchestral Project, and that is Lidiya Yankovskaya. Lydia, we're so happy to have you with us this evening. Can you speak? I know that I'm not quite sure how old the organization is, but if my memory serves me correctly, the Refugee Orchestral Project is fairly a new venture, or a venture that has been started by you within the past few years. Can you speak to your own experience as a refugee and what inspired you to create this orchestral project?
Yes, so my family came to this country as refugees in the 90s from Russia. And of course, there are the challenges of any immigrant experience. But one of the things that I found is that as one refugee group moves into another refugee group during different periods in time, that people tend to, even the most liberally minded among us, tend to form an image in our minds of what a refugee looks like at that given period, whether it's people coming from a certain part of Europe or Asia or Africa or wherever else. And most recently it was the Middle East. And in this country, of course, we have a lot of discrimination against those who come from elsewhere. But in particular, when we had a large wave of immigrants from the Middle East, or actually not even such a large wave here, but the perception of a large wave of immigrants from the Middle East, there was so much xenophobia that became very prominent both in the higher echelons of our politics and our political system and among our leaders, but in all areas of our world. And to me, that was especially strange and surprising, given that in this country in particular, everyone is an immigrant of one sort or another. Everybody's parents or grandparents or great-grandparents came from somewhere and were forced to come here, either by circumstances in their country or by someone else who forced their families to come here. Even Native Americans were at a point refugees within their own land. So I wanted to do something about this. And I also wanted to change perceptions of refugees as the other. So often we, even those of us who are liberally minded, we think of a group of refugees as these other people from elsewhere with a different language, with a different culture, but we could help them. We'll be nice about it, and we will open our doors, and we will help them, and we will aid them. But this could happen to any of us. Just because the United States has been more recently a wealthy nation that most people are not trying to flee, that doesn't mean that tomorrow, and we're even right now looking at the situation around us, for many of us, it doesn't mean that tomorrow this doesn't turn into a nation that we are afraid to remain in, or that we want to leave to seek a better life elsewhere. So with the Refugee Orchestra Project, we fight some of these prejudices by presenting music by refugee composers and featuring refugee performers. And when I speak about refugee composers, I'm not just speaking about living composers today, but also composers throughout history. For instance, Irving Berlin came to this country as a refugee. Many people don't realize that God Bless America was written by a refugee who came to this country as a teenager. And there's so many works like this. There are major classical composers, but also composers from other genres who have defined our entire musical style. Irving Berlin is one of the defining leaders in how we've approached popular music today, for instance, or musical theater, or so many other genres, as just one example, but the same with major classical composers like Rachmaninoff, for instance. So our goal is to amplify the voices of refugee composers, of refugee musicians, and we do this by presenting their music. And right now, during quarantine, we do this by doing what we can digitally, and also by launching a new commissioning project where we're pairing refugee composers and performers who are regular collaborators, and in commissioning and performing solo work without accompaniment for individual players.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lydia. Very important work. I mean, I grew up thinking that the United States was a nation of immigrants, and it's only until many years later that I realized what a controversial statement that was. It seems as if there are many things about our history that we're not comfortable recognizing. But thank you for all your work with that. Next, I would like to introduce Fred VanNess. Fred VanNess is a tenor, and we first became acquainted at Lydia School of Music along with Alex Dietrich. Fred and Alex were in the opera department. I was in the vocal performance department, but we had many opportunities to intersect in the aria monologue class. Fred, I know that you did a large portion of your education in Louisiana, where you also grew up. Would you like to speak to your experience growing up in Louisiana and how that helped form you as an artist and inspired you to going into a profession like opera?
Sure. Hi, thank you for having me. This is an amazing opportunity to be with all of you wonderful people on the panel. Yeah, so my story is a little non-traditional. I didn't study music at all while I was in grade school or elementary or high school, any of that. I literally walked into the School of Music my second year in college and said, I want to sing. And they were like, okay. And so I didn't start studying until I was like 19 years old. And at that time, I was thinking I was going to go into education because in my mind, I was thinking, I want to be able to kind of give high schoolers in my community, in my area, an opportunity that I didn't have to sing. We had a marching band because we had a great football team. And if you know anything about the South, if you have a good football team, chances are you have a good marching band. And so I never got the opportunity to sing on stage or do any of those things. And I was probably in my second year in school. And our program, we were doing Soror Angelica that year. One of my good friends, Geraldine Mitchell, was singing the lead. And this was my very first time attending an opera at all, ever. I had never seen a fully staged opera before, never heard opera sung in a foreign language on stage outside of like my music history courses. And when I saw her on stage, it completely transformed my way of thinking. I had never seen a Black person on stage singing in a foreign language before. It was Puccini, so that instantly was my sort of my love affair with Puccini. And I said, oh my God, I want to do that. And I think, especially being from the South, representation is what's really, really matters, what's really important. When I was growing up in school, there weren't many Black singers, especially Black tenors to look to at that time when I was going to school. This was like in the early 2000s. And so by now there's, I can name 4 or 5 of them that are at the top echelons of their career, but we know that there's so many more out there that just haven't had that opportunity. And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about is just representation. And I think just seeing yourself on stage it's just so huge. And so that's why every time I try to go home, I try to, even though it's a vacation for me, I try to do some sort of performance aspect or reach out to the high school I went to or go back to the college I went to, just to show representation and show that even though I went to a very small school, I had a teacher who saw something in me. And even though I was one of the only Black students in the program, I could count on my hand how many Black students were in the program, especially for vocal performance. And it was hard just because I didn't have anyone to talk to or anyone that knew my experience, my background from my community, and then to all of a sudden be plopped into a predominantly white institution and have all white colleagues on stage. I always kind of felt like I didn't belong sometimes. And because I was starting music so late, I always felt like I was playing catch up. Even sometimes now today, I still kind of have this mindset that I have to play catch up, and so that's why I'm not glad that this moment is happening right now, but I am glad the moment is happening just because I think it's forcing us to actually take a look and step back and say, what is the issue and what can we do to correct the issue going forward so that we don't have to have this conversation again or have to have this conversation every 2 or 3 years when something big happens. You're on mute, Heather.
Thanks, Red. I thoroughly agree with you as far as addressing these issues. It's exhausting to have to go back into this cycle that has just been going on for so many years in this country. Alex, would you like to introduce our next 2 panelists, Dr. Tiffany Chang and Dr. Dosman? Alexandra, can you hear me?
I can. So I'm having technical difficulties on my side sharing clips of all of our artists, but I do want everyone to know that the recording of today's forum will be placed on the NEMPAC website, in addition with all of the clips that they submitted with their permission, of course. And this is something to highlight their work, but also to give us a better understanding of who they are as artists. So at this point, I would love to continue in the vein that we're doing with opening up our forum and meeting our artists. I think that in meeting Dr. Tiffany Chang and meeting Dr. Dosman, we get a really deeper insight into the choral conducting world and into the orchestral conducting world. And Tiffany and I happen to overlap at the NEMPAC Opera Project, but I'm very honored to teach on the same faculty with Dr. Dosman at the University of Southern Maine. And he has taken the chamber singers to Vietnam on tour. He's done remarkable things with the program in just a short span. So I wanted to hand it to both Dr. Dosman and to Dr. Tiffany Chang to speak to a little bit about their experience in a classical music world that focuses so much on Western European music, and where do you differ from that in your own programming and experience?
I guess I will start. Hello, everyone. It's really great to be here and great to see all of you. Some friends that I have not seen for a really long time, so it's really great. I hope you can all hear me okay. I want to start by just saying a little bit about where I came from and sort of my life growing up, because I think it's presents a different perspective. I was born in Taiwan, and My family is from Taiwan, and my family decided, and I grew up in Taiwan until I was 7, at which point my parents decided to just pick up and immigrate to the US. And we landed up in the West Coast, lived in LA for the next 7 years of my life, at which point after middle school, my parents decided that it's time to go back to Taiwan. So we picked up and all as a family went back to Taiwan right before high school. And I went back to Taiwan in high school, attended a international school for my 4 years of high school. So as I was growing up, I had really been back and forth in 2 different cultures. And I really identify as what we identify ourselves as the third culture kid, in which, I feel like that I have been a part of 2 cultures, but I don't really belong in either culture fully. So that's kind of where I'm coming from as a person, and I'm really grateful for the sort of global perspective that I've had when I was in college, when I was in high school, and then going to college at a very liberal institution, Oberlin, and I'm very grateful to be working at Oberlin now and leading one of the orchestras. And what I really try to do is, with the orchestra that I'm conducting at Oberlin, is to create a space where there is a sense of belonging, and there's a sense that everyone from all walks of life can come and really be their true self and feel like that they can be their true self. And the ensemble that I work with primarily at Oberlin is an ensemble for the avocational musician. So these can be college students who are majoring in biology, or a staff member who's working in admissions, a professor who's teaching literature. We have a curator of the art museum who plays viola, who plays with us. So we really have a really wide range of musicians that participate in this orchestra that I conduct. And we have also have some high school students. So the age range is really vast. And it's one of the challenges that I face is how to create a space that welcomes all of these people who have these different life experiences. And I've been really grateful to have been given this challenge, because I feel like it makes me grow as an artist and as a person as well in that process.
Well, and that's one of the things that we didn't necessarily focus on in our introductions of how to achieve inclusivity. That one of the demographics that we frequently leave out is that ageist perspective. How do we continue making music if no one takes a chance on you past a certain point in your respective genre when you hit a certain age? And I know that there's in the opera world the whole perspective of like 30 and done, or 35 and done, and then they don't want to continue giving you those initial opportunities. But on the opposite end of things, what do you do once you have had this fulfilling life of playing an instrument, and then suddenly no one lets you in? Essentially, no one lets you to the table. And so that's very beautiful work that you're doing at Oberlin in terms of really the appreciation of the avocational, but also upholding the root of the word amateur, which really is rooted in that initial love coming from that parent word. And that's one of those things that I find across the spectrum when I hear different choruses of different levels of professionalism, that joy and that love and that passion for creating never goes away, regardless of how your voice ages. And Dr. Dosman, you get to work with such wonderful young singers at the University of Southern Maine. In your work, do you find that the choral literature that is expected to be programmed, it veers towards one's initial perspective, or are you really able at the university and in your work to program how you want to expose in your music education?
Well, I feel fortunate that I've had the opportunity to work with a vast, not just university singers. I work with a community chorus in South Berwick, Maine, which is on the border of New Hampshire. And many of those people are seniors the average age is over 60. So I get a chance to see that spectrum, and they're lifelong singers. I think the oldest member we have is in his 80s. And to address your question about the music education that I can provide at the university, I think because of what I teach, I can expose students to a variety of other literature that they probably wouldn't have been exposed. And because some of these people I knew, for instance, Sidney Guillaume, he's written a lot of music from Haiti. He's a Haitian American composer. I've been able to invite him in. One time he showed up in person and surprised me right before we went to Vietnam because we were performing one of his pieces. We've had Andre Thomas, who's an African-American composer, come and give a workshop and answer some hard questions. I think informing and giving students the opportunity to be exposed to different styles authentically of high quality is something that we can do at a place like USM. And I feel very fortunate that I have the support of the administration and the faculty to continue to do this. And I have other colleagues that are doing similar things. One is the head of Voice, Melinda Haslett. I really admire what she's done with bringing women composers to the forefront. So I think that where we work at, that's kind of how we roll. We try to be as diverse and inclusive as we can be in many different facets, but to also do it authentically without having it be tokenism, because that's something that I deeply resent.
I think I'm in full agreement with what you just said, and that really opens up the door to all of our panelists for our forum. And after that forum, I will seek to share a couple of extra works of our artists. But just opening off the bat of the discussion, we face so many different hurdles. And when we look at equity in terms of diversity in the arts and all of these challenges of being a woman getting into leadership, being a member of the LGBTQIA community and being included, being a person of color, and how that varies between the Black community, between the Latinx community, between the Asian community, between the indigenous people. I think that we have so many hurdles that we want to tackle at the same time. And that can be very, very exhausting to feel like you're making strides a little bit with either your intention in programming or with the colleagues that you hire or cast to work with. And I wanna pose it to each one of you. What personal steps do you take in your field to follow your personal plan of social justice to overcome these obstacles? I think that those in our audience today identify with so many of you and in different facets. And I think just hearing your personal missions and how you've implemented them artistically will be such a wonderful inspiration to the younger members of our audience. And Michael and Rachel, I wanna hand it off to you first, and then invite the rest of our panelists to follow suit and join into the conversation.
Sure, Rachel, you wanna go first?
You can hit it, Michael.
Yeah, it's a good topic to talk about, and just cut to it. I personally think, and maybe this is from my race equity training, is that race is so deeply embedded into this culture, and there are so many systems and institutions that perpetuate it, that in many ways, I think it's important to focus your efforts on race first, because I believe if we can fix race in our organizations, the other marginalized communities it'll be easier. We'll have a roadmap. It'll be easier to deal with those issues. I know that when I first got here, the press announced me, and all these articles led with diversity hire, and when everyone learned that I was gay and also had an Asian child, not only did the Black people reach out, but every marginalized person in Boston who was an artist was like, fix it all now. And you can't. And so I just have chosen at New Rep to really focus on race. And when we have opportunities to focus on uplifting other marginalized voices, we take them. we take every single opportunity, but our focus at the moment is on race. So I also believe that one of the things that we're seeing in the Black Lives Matter movement is that we're seeing people are pushing for accountability. These solidarity statements aren't enough. They want action steps that have measurements. And I kind of believe that is a way to deal with institutionalized race, or I should say racism, because racism is structural, it is systemic, and it is institutionalized. So it's redundant to use those words. But I believe in having some measurable. So things like at least 50% people of color. This will help with the tokenism. So for our productions every year, we hire at least 50% people of color on the productions. And that's actors, artists, stage managers, crew. At least 50% of our people have to be people of color. And we don't settle for less than that. We are working with the board right now to come up with board governance items. I'm pushing them to be 50% people of color on the board. Until then, I told them that we need to create an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee. I don't even like those words because those are safe words that white people created to make them feel comfortable. I like anti-racism, anti-oppression, and white supremacy committees because that's really what we're talking about. And I told them that I want this committee to have, to give consensus on every single board policy and vote before it goes to vote. So they're looking at it from an anti-racism lens. But I think that, and there are dozens of things that people can do, but I think though, putting in measurables and action steps to tackle this is a great way to deal with it. And I would center, I mean, I am personally centering race first in my work, in this work.
Thank you, Michael. Just to go off that, I'm gonna be very, oh, my cat might be making an appearance soon. So I'm gonna be very honest and very vulnerable in this moment, which is I almost, as honored as I was to be on this panel, I almost kindly declined because I feel that the focus right now is very much on race and Black Lives Matters. And I honestly felt like, you know, I know that as a woman, I am in a marginalized group, but I am also a white woman. So I know the privilege that carries. And I just want to acknowledge that right now, that I agree with Michael that I believe as an artist right now that the focus should be on race as well. But I am a woman, and I do, obviously, as the women here, female identifying artists face as well as everyone here faces in different ways. But as a director, something for me that is so important. I believe that as directors, we have a position of influence. I don't like to call it a position of power. I like to say a position of influence. So I feel it is my casting inclusively is a priority, and I believe it should be a priority for every director. And our shows, our stories need to reflect the world that we're living in, which are colorful and diverse, and there's a place for all. So in terms of what I can help push artistic directors and producers is saying, hey, have we considered this person? You know, a lot of the experiences I've had is, but the door is open. We put the casting notice out. The actors of color didn't show up. That's not an excuse anymore. We have to be proactively bringing in those artists. It's not enough just to open the door. We need to escort them into the room. We need to show them that there is a place, and then be true to that, and then have the show reflect that as well. Actors of color will not walk in the door if you say, yes, we're gonna promote this, and then the show still doesn't reflect that. So we have to, as Michael said, we have to, and I include myself in this, be accountable and hold ourselves accountable for that. And, you know, personal action plans for me, I have always strived to be an advocate for voices who are underrepresented. I've always tried to bring them to have a seat at the table, as you know, I like to say. I've had to tell producers when they have precast actors who weren't the correct race for a role that they could not do that, and they rescinded those offers. And I believe it is my duty as having a position of influence to speak that and to say, we cannot do this and why. So in the face of racism and inequality, I am committed to speaking up, standing up against that, and, you know, having the gall to walk away if it doesn't happen. And that's standing in your own strength, which is a lesson I've learned over the years. So that's my piece.
I think that's so beautiful. And I wanna jump in here and just hand it over to Lydia, who I know over your career, Lydia, you're very much an advocate for new compositions. And it's really, I think, amazing to take an art form and really promote, not only just once, but through the workshop phase, through the presenting at a larger and larger stage phase of a new work. But then you do it repeatedly, which I have so much admiration for. Our last Ask an Expert panel, we did have Dan Shore on, and we're able to see 2 different clips from Freedom Ride, which you presented at the Chicago Opera Theater this past season. But I know that just in your work with the Juventus New Music Ensemble and at Chicago Opera Theater and elsewhere, that this is really a way to address problematic vehicles that just get repeated in the canon and replace them with stories that glorify and amplify voices, as opposed to promoting tropes that have been handed down from generation to generation. And as an opera artistic director and as an opera singer, I openly call out the opera world as being the final frontier of really digging in your heels on those tropes, like really trying to make sure that, you know what, it's not offensive, like if we do it this one teeny tiny change, and no, it's still offensive. And so I wanna pose this same question to you in terms of your work on stage with new works, but also how you build your design teams, because I see your panel discussions and the diversity on the panel and in the design team is so key to making sure that these tropes don't hit costume, hair, makeup, and other elements of a show. So I wanted to pass it over to you next.
Yeah, so many things to follow up on, and also such important things said by Michael and Dr. Dosman and Rachel. First, to follow up on what Michael was saying, there is no excuse for not having real representation behind the scenes, especially to start. Let's start there. But in every realm, there's no excuse, period. But the reason I bring up behind the scenes specifically is that I hear so many companies right now moved by the current moment, wanting to bring more representation to the stage, but not talking about what happens in the leadership. Because how can you make any change if the decision makers all look the same and all come from the same background? So to me, that is the number one starting point, because you need to, the position of power and the position of the decision makers needs to reflect the world that you're in. At Chicago Opera Theater, we work really hard to make sure that our staff represents our community, our city, our world, that the people on the stage do. We are working to make that better and better on the board. Like Michael, that is was saying, for him, that is still a work in progress for us that we're striving towards. But for so many organizations, that is not a consideration, which to me is always quite shocking. So let's start there. Then moving on to repertoire, which Dr. Dosman spoke about in his university. I remember when I was still a student, I was a student at Boston University, and I was also working for the Zamir Chorale in Boston, which is an organization that promotes Jewish music by choral music by Jewish composers. And I remember a major conductor of choral music saying to me, well, it's too bad there's no music by Jewish composers. Which, if we start there, and we all know there are tons of Jewish composers, tons of them throughout history. So if we think that there's no music even by Jewish composers, and by the way, meanwhile, I was working for an organization that does only music by Jewish composers all the time, and the person knew this, then then imagine the misconceptions about music by other groups that people are even less aware of, even women who make up 50% plus of the population and have written tons of music throughout history. And there's so many composers from the African diaspora, again, throughout history, who are incredible, who have been neglected. The problem is that they have not been in the narrative, because the narrative has been limited to a very specific kind of cultural and racial perspective. And because they have not been in the narrative, the assumption that many make, especially who also come from that cultural perspective, is that they do not exist, which is frightening. One of the things that is also key to having people from various backgrounds in positions of power is that those of us who have been marginalized are aware what it means to be overlooked or for assumptions to be made just because you don't fit into that box. For a number of years, I was the only female music director of any major American opera company. There are now two of us as only of a couple of months ago. Like all of you, I'm sure we share these experiences where, because people have not seen someone who looks like you in a position, they assume that you must have some other kind of position, or you're not qualified for this, even though you have lots of qualifications, or people make assumptions about your resume or otherwise, or your background, that aren't true. And I think this is such a thing that permeates our world to such an extent, and we have to fight it. It takes effort. So when I program pieces and when I decide what kind of music I'm going to put on, I can't just go to my music history textbook that I studied in college and go to the Wikipedia page for famous operas of today and get what I'm looking for, or just to reference things I've seen before. It takes effort to find the things that have been overlooked. And most importantly, I think, and this is going back to what you asked, Alex, we need to make sure that these voices continue to be amplified and that this status quo does not continue into the future. It is not acceptable. And I think it is our role as any artist, and especially those in leadership positions, but any artist in general, to uplift and give resources to those who might be marginalized. In the one thing that I'm seeing right now in many major organizations is they'll take one way that this turns itself is they'll identify a really talented young artist. So let's say a young talented Black artist, and they'll say, we're going to commission that artist to do something, but they're not giving that artist the resources they need to do it well. And also, as we all know, if you are new in whatever group you represent to the field, there's much more pressure on you to do well, because if something fails, then the assumption is like, well, I told you so, or they're not ready. And then even if it's not a direct, like, well, they couldn't do it, let's say in my case, they couldn't do it because they're a woman, it'll be a, well, women just don't get those opportunities, or women don't have the support, or whatever. There are secondary answers to this. So I think it is on us to help that person succeed and to give everything we can to them and every resource we can to them to make sure that they continue to succeed, to give them the mentorship, the support they need, so that they can again amplify others with them and start this wave and continue this wave, because it needs to change. At Chicago Opera Theater, we are actively commissioning and working with composers of all colors. We are trying to tell as many stories as possible on the stage, and this is also very important and something that Michael alluded to. What stories are we telling? And it's the story, for instance, that has to have someone who is, let's say, African-American in it, only about their being African-American. How do we change this? How do we bring different stories to the stage? I want to give one quick anecdote before we move on. So as Alex mentioned, we just did the Opera Freedom Ride, which is about the freedom riders of the civil rights movement. And we had our usual auditions, as we normally do. We always just announce our operas for the season. We always have a clause encouraging people from various backgrounds to come to our auditions, but we just simply announce the operas, and then people show up to auditions. Because we were doing Freedom Ride, we had more African-American singers than I'd ever heard in a single audition process show up or tell us or come to us or have managers propose people to us. And now this says some good things about telling a story that people can relate to. It also says some bad things about why these individuals did not previously feel comfortable coming to audition for the opera, or why they previously didn't submit their materials. And in particular, at the same time, I was casting Freedom Ride and I was casting a Russian opera for which I needed a very particular kind of singer. I needed a soprano with a very particular kind of exceptional voice to lead the show, who also had experience in Russian because it was a quick turnaround. And I had such trouble casting this role. And basically everything for the season was cast for this role. And one manager had sent me this singer for the leading role of Sylvie in Freedom Ride. And the singer was not right for that role at all. It wasn't the right voice type, it wasn't the right singer. And for some reason, the manager only suggested her for Freedom Ride. And I listened to her voice and I thought, oh, she'd be perfect for this Russian opera. But the manager didn't suggest her. I guess it must be because either she's not available or she hasn't done Russian or doesn't want to. And it was only because the singer was perfect for the Russian role and because she was exceptional in every way that I reached out to the manager and I said, I just wanted to follow up. Is this singer by chance available for this Russian piece? She's not right for Freedom Ride, but I really want to cast her in this other thing. And it turned out that not only was she available, she had sung the role before. She had sung that Russian role before. She knew it. She was perfect for it in every way. And the manager did not suggest her for it. And I imagine from the manager's perspective, it was, well, she's more likely to get cast in that thing or whatever. I don't even know. But it was so mind-boggling to me, but also really eye-opening because it shows just how entrenched these things are systemically and how important it is for me as someone who casts people for roles to do the research and to go out there and ask. Because if she were good for the role, but not quite so above and beyond, or let's say if I didn't struggle so much casting that Russian role and I had looked elsewhere and wasn't putting so much time into this for that reason, I would never have asked. And if I hadn't asked, she wouldn't have even been under consideration. Wow. And that's frightening. And I think that puts responsibility on all of us to do our work, to seek out those artists, to realize that discrimination is there and it's there through and through, and to fight it actively, but by ensuring that the stories we tell on the stage, the works that we program, that the people we work with and the people we put on the stage and the people who are behind the scenes all represent our world.
Yeah, Lydia, I think that's an excellent point. And you bring up a number of excellent points. One about mentorship, and then the other one about leadership that I want to bring up in a moment. I think generally speaking, I think what all industries are kind of struggling with and not quite understanding is I think that they have to understand, they have to accept that what needs to happen is going to require everyone to go out of their comfort zone and go farther than they normally would because the deck has been stacked a certain way for so long. And when it comes to your point about mentorship, I think in general, what tends to happen with a very competitive profession like the performing arts industry is I think that there's kind of this perception that it's kind of like a conveyor belt of artists. And it's kind of like this kind of sink or swim type of mentality. And it's certainly when it comes to creating a show, creating an opera, I mean, you have composers like Verdi who needed 3 or 4 times in order to really develop their style and get it right, quote unquote. And I think the industry doesn't really realize that there needs to be a significant amount of mentorship. What I wanted to ask
anyone, for a person of any background.
Or of any background, yes. And I wanted to bring up a point about leadership and specifically board of directors and the way that the arts are financed. Because sometimes I question whether or not that the current economic model that we have and the current way of dealing with board of directors and the power that some of these boards have and the makeup of these boards tend to leaning towards conservative and towards people who have a lot of money. Is that a big impediment when it comes to creating change and wanting to do newer operas and wanting to kind of go out on a limb? And if it is there another economic model that we can kind of investigate or experiment with that might free us from from the dependence on this type of because finances, I mean, especially in opera, are like, it's a life and death matter. There's so many people and so many things that have to come together in order for opera to function. That's like, we're very dependent. That's why we do Madame Butterfly like once every other year, because they're members of these boards that very much want to see shows like that. But that's not going to bring us where we need to go. And how do we even begin to kind of, unwrap that?
Can I just hop in real quick?
Sure.
So the whole model of boards is based on white supremacy. When you become a nonprofit, the IRS tells you you have to have at least 3 people to be on your board. So that needs to go away. People that give to your organization should give out of altruism and want to support, not because they want power over what you do and what you program. So I would love my board. I love my board, and we had a lot of work to do, but I would love my board to make contributions and be engaged, altruistic volunteers with no power. They have no knowledge of how to run a theater, but yet they actually have all the ultimate power. So that whole system is broken. So that needs a whole like nonprofit shakeup, law change, which is the hard part. But you can also change a couple of policies within the board to make sure there is accountability for what kind of power that they have. So anyway, I won't say more.
I think though that does open that initial door of conversation, and there have been some wonderful comments in the box, and Lydia has added to the comment section before we pivot over to question and answers that she'd be curious to hear about the power structures within some of the boards of our own organizations. And I know that some of our representatives work with universities, so there's that structure to interact with and have a budget that you need to stay within, and also submitting all of your proposals for the upcoming year and have them approved by the respective heads of school. And then within the nonprofit status, dependent on size, or even looking down to the community theater level of who starts that initial door, who starts the grassroots door opening, and how do we commit to that. So I want to ask both Dr. Dosman and Dr. Chang about being in the educational system in terms of the power structure and being able to structure your programs the way that you artistically want to be fulfilled, and you with your specific social justice agendas to be fulfilled. How does that fit within the university system?
Well, Dr. Chang, I would say, just to full disclosure here, Dr. Chang is working at Oberlin, and I was a student at Oberlin. And so I've seen, when I was a student at Oberlin, the administration had quite a bit of power, and particularly non-tenure faculty had to really toe the line as far as sticking to the Western canon. And I'm so glad that you're at Oberlin, because when I was there were no female conductors at all. And very few people of color at Oberlin that were not international students. So how is it now?
Well, I think that you think of Oberlin as a place that is so liberal, yeah, and yet you step on campus and you still see these signs of racial division, and people feeling like they're marginalized, students feeling like that they don't belong, and I'm really proud that Oberlin has become the place that it has in the last few years, expanding their faculty diversity and expanding their various programs geared towards students who have interests in not your bread and butter classical music, Western classical music. And I think that one of the things that Oberlin is currently struggling with is how to adapt our curriculum that is very based in the traditions of learning about a very specific slice of history, and expanding it so that the next generation of musicians don't have this tunnel vision and have this wider array of knowledge, and that I think that promotes change. That and it's a very difficult conversation because the landscape is changing, and you know, we as teachers, we teach the way that we are taught. So I feel a tremendous responsibility to really learn as I'm teaching, and to learn beyond what I had learned as a student, and to bring different ideas. And I feel like I'm really in a position to help the students discover new paths and to discover new repertoire. And I think that programming is so important to help an organization develop its identity and what they are, who they are, and what do they want to say to the world. And I think one really important part of that process in the programming is to listen to the people who are playing the music, to listen, to give them a place to have a word in presenting their own interests in music that maybe doesn't fit into this neat box that we've been given all, you know, in our formative education, and to listen to what their experiences are and what they want to see, so that they feel like that they have contributed, and that they feel like that that they own the product, that they own the season, and that they own the programming, and they become advocates for themselves, and as well as the diverse music that they play. And but it is very challenging within a traditional educational format, and we're really trying to break the boundaries in that.
And one of the first places that we actually have our first question in the question box, that those boundaries can be broken, and I love that Joe from Theater at First has written in to start the question and answer section, is that even before going to school for the arts, which obviously meant that there was some aha moment. Fred, you shared with us the wonderful moment of Geraldine on stage, and Joe has asked, where do we connect with, I'm assuming them meaning either people of color or LGBTQ artists, or insert the ability to diversify and make your theater more inclusive. How can we connect from a community theater stance? How do we open ourselves and attract greater diversity as an opportunity for all of us without tokenizing or objectifying the Black community, the Indigenous people community, and other people of color as individuals? And I think that, Fred, from a performer's perspective, this is one of those questions that I have dealt with differently as a passing person of color. I am Puerto Rican, but I am well aware of my privilege in terms of presenting white, and it has impacted me on both sides of my life. And so I want to pass it over to you to give us a performer's perspective, and then open it up to the entire panel to address.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think about my experiences coming from the South, being, even though I went to primarily white school, still being among my community versus moving to Boston and completely not having it in my community. In my town that I live in, Beverly now, I can count on one hand how many Black people I've seen live on my street. I went to a Black Lives Matter march yesterday, and there were maybe 20 of us there out of like maybe 200 or 300. And so that just gives you an idea of like the type of community I live in. And so I remember going to an audition, a local audition, and I sang for them, and I got a phone call from one of the people, I'm not gonna name any names, but one of the top people, and it was a microaggression. He didn't realize it, but he called me and said, "Oh, I have to say that you did a wonderful job. I loved your voice. It was a wonderful audition you gave, but I have to apologize, because when you walked in the room, we weren't expecting to hear the sound that we heard come out of your mouth." And I was a very young singer at the time, still in school, and I didn't know how to take that. And while a part of me was upset and let down, I was still excited, because I was like, "Oh, this is someone that does this opera company, and he really likes my voice." But at the same time, like, what were you expecting to come out of my mouth when I walked into the room? And so that's how I kind of started my professional career, you know, with that kind of in the back of my mind. And so every time I walk into a room now, even though it's been years and years and years, and I try to put it in my mind, I always think like, is every person behind the table thinking that when they see a 6'3" Black man come in the room with locks that's from Louisiana, are they going to, like, what sound are they expecting to hear from me? And I even had a teacher once tell me, have you ever thought about cutting your hair and you think that might be a hindrance to why you haven't progressed as much as you have in your career? And I thought, well, what's my hair have to do with anything about what I'm singing? That does nothing to do with diction or musicality or acting. That it's hair. Like, if you can't look past strands of hair, I honestly don't know what else to tell you. So those are just a few experiences that I've experienced and things that I've kind of have dealt with. And even when I go to auditions, like I did a very big audition recently. And I've done it a few times. And for some reason, there was a lot of Black people in the audition room that year. And I was like, why are there so many people come here? Like, I've never seen this many Black people in the room before. And then come to find out, the word was going around that they were about to do Porgy and Bess. And I was like, that's why everyone's trying to work. But I'm like, you shouldn't have these many people coming to your audition just because you're doing Porgy and Bess. You should invite these people to the audition all the time. You should be reaching out to them. Like Lydia was saying, you should be reaching out and looking for those people. Yeah, so those have just been some of my experiences. But things that I'm doing myself is I try to do a lot of recitals at the church that I sing at. And so what I try to do on my recitals, I try to program Black composers, and I try to program at least one female composer on my program. Because a lot of times they'll walk up to me afterwards and say, I've never heard that music before. I've never heard that composer. That was beautiful. And it kind of encourages them to kind of think outside of their Mozart, Puccini, Verdi box, or their Strauss, Beethoven, Brahms, whatever the art song or opera may be. It kind of forces them to look out of their box, and I think, and so that's what I'm trying to do as a performer that doesn't have a powerful position or anything, to kind of change people's minds and how they look at music and the arts in general and artists in general.
I think that's great, because I do think that every performer has an individual list of responsibility. I frequently, when asked to do a concert, if I get to choose the repertoire, I frequently choose Latin American composers, or I choose Spanish composers, just because there is this Western European lack of equality for literature that is written originally to be sung in Spanish. And those microaggressions occur. One of the most recent concerts I did, the comment of the conductor afterwards was, oh, wow, we've never used the castanets so much in one concert. And it's like, it's not like a huge dig, but the dig is there. And so then amplified to a much larger scale, when we're looking at all of your organizations in the orchestra or on stage. And Michael, I know that New Rep has made this commitment to casting 50% people of color. What kind of tips can we give to community theaters and to other level theaters of being an activist and reaching out to artists and attracting this amount of diversity to any vehicle, as opposed to just, as Fred stated, the Porgies and Besses and the vehicles that have so comfortably for too long been known to be, well, we're going to feature people of color in this one item.
Yeah, just on the Porgy and Bess thing, because I think it's a good example of the kinds of relationships organizations have with people of color. Those relationships that feature one Black show or one Asian show or one Latinx show, that's a transactional relationship. You're bringing me in to get my money, but you don't really want me there. If you are a predominantly white organization, only the bravest of people of color will walk in your door when you post your audition notices. And most of us put it at the end of the audition notice. You may have more luck if you lead with it before your mission and vision statement. Go, this is a space for you. So the other thing I would say about predominantly white organizations is that you have a lot of power. The people that made the rules have the power to change the rules. A fiercely white or fiercely all white organization has a tremendous amount of power. You guys have the power to say, today we're doing this. And then you can call up other organizations and say, do this too. So I like to use the metaphor, not a metaphor, I like to use the analogy that for gay people, we know a space is safe because there's a rainbow sticker in the window, right? We have that marker. We don't have these kinds of markers in the people of color world or other marginalized communities. The way we find out if your space is safe is word of mouth. And that word of mouth comes through your actions. What have you done? What bold moves have you made? What changes have you made to make sure this space is safe for me? And actually, safe is actually an interesting word, because there really should be, in the race equity world, it's called the triple A. There's access. I want to have access to your space. 2, there's affirmation. When I walk in your space, I want to know that you really do want me here because you care about me and not just want my money. And then 3rd, there's affinity space. Can I be in a space with other people that are like me? So your actions have to sort of uplift all those things. And it takes time. It takes a minute. But if you are fiercely anti-racist, and what I mean by that is you have done the work to educate yourself. It all starts with education. Dismantling racism is major surgery. And so many people re-injure people because they haven't educated themselves, but they go hard at it. They'll say things like, oh, there's so many more castanets in the concert, right? Not meaning to hurt you, but they make those kinds of, they say those kinds of things, not necessarily. So educate yourself, have actionable steps, and be fiercely anti-racist. And also the other thing I would suggest too is if you are predominantly white, the casting notices aren't going to help. You have to make one-on-one connections with people. You have to go see them in concert, take them out to dinner, take them out to coffee, let them know why you want them in the space, and then affirm to them that when they get there, they're valued there.
Thank you so much for that. I want to pass this exact same question over to our other panelists, and please do feel free to jump in. This is such an important topic, and it also even begins to scratch at that surface of just coming to the table to have that initial conversation can be so hard, whether it's an organization or a person or, you know, like talking to a family member. So this stretches much beyond the arts, but the arts should be able to be a place where we can tell any story and every story. And so I want to include, in passing this off to the panel, any final thoughts you may have on being an ally versus or including being an anti-racist, because I think that as language evolves, that it's so easily there to be shut down and afraid of saying, did I use terminology that was offensive? Did I slip up? And I greatly appreciate that we all come from such different genres and backgrounds and upbringings that we've all experienced our own sense of fitting into the world and acknowledging what that means, and in light of privilege or not in light of privilege. And so opening it up to the panel, allyship, anti-racism, making safe spaces for women in a gender parity situation for positions that might not be there. How can we as artists lift up someone else's voice, and how does it pertain to your field?
I think when we're in a position of privilege, like I acknowledge being a male puts me in a certain position of privilege, even though I'm a man of color. I see it happen, and some people are, what I found is that people are unaware of what that privilege means and how that interaction happens. So developing alliances and true friendships with people who are not like you can really make a difference, where you can have honest conversations. I have female friends that will call me out on things, and I won't get mad because I know it's coming from a good place, and I know it's something that I wouldn't notice because I walk in a male body. At the same time, I know it's not their job to educate me on that maybe I should really be looking at those things. And when I have an opportunity to lift somebody up in another way that is marginalized, whether it be gender or any other reason, to use that male privilege to say, we need to hear female voices, because oftentimes in positions like conducting or in leadership positions, female voices are often shut down. I've seen men talk over women or mansplain. Calling those things out are important. At the same time, as a person of color, oftentimes I'm an enigma to some people. And I've had to spend most of my life explaining who I am and having a certain degree of patience and realizing that not everyone is coming from a bad place when they have these oops moments where, like, you could see the egg on the face. They knew they said the wrong thing. They don't know how to get out of it. And then that's the time you spend to educate in a way that is humanistic, letting them know you messed up. I don't hate you for it, but you have to do better. At the university level, you know, I can educate others as a professor. But on a human interpersonal level, when I'm working with peers, it's a little bit different, because especially if you've been on a, you know, worked in a nonprofit, which I have, talking to board members who have lots of money to spend, and you want that money to continue to be spent, but they're doing things that are clearly offensive. How to have that conversation in a tactful way can sometimes be difficult. So I think having allies and developing interpersonal relationships with people is a good first step. It's got to go beyond that, though.
Going to pass this to any of our other panelists who would like to add on. We do have another question in our question box. And at this time, I just want to invite anyone who wants to remain in this discussion, that I will continue this discussion. Although it was scheduled to end at 7 p.m. I know that there's a lot to unpack, and I want to thank all of our panelists from the North End Music and Performing Arts Center for being here with us tonight. So thank you so much, but to keep the conversation going, if there are any other panelists who'd like to add on.
Yeah, super quickly, just to add on to what Nicolás said, that be careful of allyship, because in my experiences, allyship is a way to absolve yourself from doing something. I'm an ally, I'm an ally. Because I've been in a room where people said some racist and homophobic shit, and none of my allies stepped up to say anything. So just be careful that if you're going to use that word allyship, you are actually doing something. Accomplices is another thing people have used, but I think accomplice is a way to attach yourself to something as opposed to lead. So for me, I like activists and advocates, because those are people that are leading and making and doing something. That's just my only thing I would add to that.
Thank you. I'm going to read our final question, and if there are any other questions, what I would love to invite all of our audience to do is please list them in the chat box as we're discussing this last question, and I will make sure that we as NEMPAC reach out to all of our panelists and ask for their input on it, and it will be featured with the link to tonight's video for those who were unable to join. I will be excited to watch the 10 minutes that I missed due to bad Wi-Fi. My apologies again on not being able to share our video shares for our artists. But our last question comes from Alicia. When it comes to advertising and outreach, what are some suggestions you might have for predominantly white suburban theater communities to get our audition notices out more specifically to people of color? I'm going to hop on this one just a little bit and say that there are wonderful resources on Facebook. There are groups that are designated to vast regions of community theaters, like the EMAC Dash group in Massachusetts is a wonderful way of breaking down that door of saying, you know, like audition announcement, but then beyond, there are other ways to initiate those conversations. So handing it off to those on our panel who have either had their hand in how do you feature a concert, how do you promote an activity to then show that you are that safe space for actors and performers of color, for LGBTQ performers.
I'll put suggestions in the chat. I've talked a lot.
Rachel, I know that you program and direct so many works that are predominantly in areas that demand a cast of people of color. What are successful ways that you have made sure to maintain and continue to strive for even further inclusivity in casting and outreach to communities of color?
Sure. As a director, honestly, I don't have as much say typically in the beginning processes of putting the word out. I've found with a lot of fringe and smaller theater companies, what has been asked of me actually over the years is helping them create the casting notice, which has evolved over the last several years on how to, as Michael said, how do you lead with the information you need? And I found that is crucial on helping actors of color in particular know that this theater is looking, you're doing a production of Urinetown. It's not just a Porgy and Bess. Like, you want to know that these theaters are welcoming all voices. So that's something that I found I've been able to help with, or I'll say, could I look at the casting notice before you send it out? Because I've often had friends, artists of color, email me and say, did you see what your theater posted about your show? And I'll be like, oh no. And then I have to go back and then I have to talk to them and say, hey, could we please change the language on this? And then, because I want to be responsible for that, because I want that talent to come in the door. So that's some beginning steps. I can use the example for when I worked on In the Heights. It came after another production in the state of Massachusetts that also needed Latinx cast, and had some challenges finding that cast. And so we were riding those heels, and we were a much smaller theater company, and there was no question. Every actor needed to be a person of color. The principals were all Latinx, and then the rest of the cast. And we were determined, and it took us several months to find the cast, but we reached out. There was just no other choice. And I've been reading a lot where I just feel that larger theater companies have to be responsible for, they have the means, they have the resources, they have the money, they have to be doing that work. If a smaller mid-sized theater company can do it, I have to challenge every larger theater company that they can do it as well. So that's my perspective and thoughts on that.
Thank you so much for that. In conclusion, to wrap up this evening, I also want to just read a comment that Michael left earlier about microaggressions. And I think that this is a little tidbit that I find very helpful. And I work alongside Dr. Dosman with university students, and we are at a very formative stage for those young artists. We're at the stage where they kind of commit all in or they leave. And knowing that their voice is important, and one of the ways that we, when I first started this past fall, that I wanted to advocate for was having gender neutrality for a restroom. And it's all of those little things that are within our control to chip away at a block that seems insurmountable at times. And Michael's comment of, when a microaggression happens, just say, I'm sorry, and then take it upon yourself to educate yourself about why it is a microaggression. I think that little tidbit, it's hard to know that it's okay to say you're sorry, and that it doesn't necessitate that you're a bad person. And sometimes those things get conflated so readily, especially in the arts, where we've gone through all of this extensive training to be perfect, be perfect, be perfect. The first thing I tell my students when they start with me, there is no such thing as perfect music. Now, I will say, singing under Lydia's baton might be the closest to perfection that I've ever wanted to achieve, because like singing 5/4 music or 7/8 music while 6 months pregnant, I think, Lydia, you get full credit for my son humming Stravinsky around the house, because it's one of those things that when somebody leads you and lets you know that you are in a safe and a brave space, that it is that much more empowering. But taking that personal ownership is difficult at times. And so I respect everything that all of our panelists had to contribute this evening. Thank you so much from the North End Music and Performing Arts Center. Once again, this will be featured on nempacboston.org, but I highly, highly recommend that you check out Rachel Bertone's work all around the greater Boston area when she is directing and choreographing. You are destined to enjoy an all-encompassing macro-micro production. Just her work is exquisite. Dr. Dosman is pioneering in Maine, a state that has been in the news lately for lacking in diversity, which if you grew up there like I did, you know that. But I do think that even in chipping away at the Western choral music standard by introducing contemporary works, that Dr. Dosman, you are doing inspiring work as a music educator, and I'm so proud to teach alongside of you. And please do follow Michael Bobbitt's work over at New Rep. They have announced an exciting season coming up, not the least of which features Doubts, the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. We have Angels in America, Millennium Approaches. That's the first iteration for the play, the first half. And then everything else in his season, please do see his action plan at his theater. Please check out Dr. Tiffany Chang's work. I'm biased because I have the joy of working alongside her at NEMPAC Opera, and we've enjoyed her company for all of our 9 seasons, although this season got cut a little bit short, and her work over at Oberlin as well. And Lidiya Yankovskaya at Chicago Opera Theater, but also very near and dear to my heart is her work with the Refugee Orchestra Project. As someone who descends from people who came here under duress in Puerto Rico's history, it's so tripling and amplifying to see what is occurring in our country at the border, and knowing that we have put the limitation on how we treat humans in that respect, and to see it decolonized in an orchestra setting and with singers. Her work is exquisite. Please do check out the Refugee Orchestra Project. And for our guest earlier this evening, Ana Masacote, her work is at Yo Soy Lola. Unfortunately, we were unable to see her video of gender fluid leading in salsa, but all the videos with permission from our panelists will be made available on nempacboston.org. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And join us again in 2 weeks' time when we have an all-new topic on Ask an Expert. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.